put olfaction and taste together so that we can experience flavor. I am going to leave quite a bit of this out and just do what I consider to be the funner studies and things to talk about. Taste and olfaction together, what we see is that as we're putting those solids or liquids that will become liquids into, like, will dissolve onto the tongue into our mouths, then some of those odorants are going up through the nasal pharynx, through this retronasal root, so that they are hitting those olfactory receptor neurons. I think it's a really good thing to do the demo on page 408, where you just a few times drink coffee or eat something where at first you keep your nose plugged and then you release it so that you really get the olfaction and the full flavor. To some extent, our perception of flavor and our experience with food also is influenced by things like vision and the feel of the food and the temperature of the food and all of those things. But typically they talk about flavor as being the taste and the olfaction, those pieces and parts. But olfaction is a huge part of our experience of flavor. We're not just tasting those basic taste qualities. When the nose is pinched, or anytime a person has lost their sense of smell. So we've all experienced this most likely when we've had a cold, that things just don't taste as good. They're not as flavorful. They have some examples here where each of those X's is an individual. So this is kind of fun. Sodium oleate has a kind of soapy taste, but it is flavor. It is very influenced by our sense of smell. And so when people pinch their noses, most people are saying it's tasteless. Ferrous sulfate has a kind of metallic taste. This is what we're tasting when we're tasting our blood. Has that ferrous component, but then we plug our noses and most people are again saying it's tasteless. MSG is one of those basic taste qualities, and you can see this is an old study because they don't have umami as a choice on there, and most people, given these choices, are saying that MSG tastes kind of salty. With the nose open, they clamp their nose and it still tastes kind of salty. So that is giving us some of that basic taste quality through the taste receptors. Again, do the demo on page 408. Go try this with at least a few foods. Coffee's a good one, but there are lots of, it's really, if you haven't really consciously said to yourself, hey, this is mostly my sense of smell, especially things that are spicy and have different spices, or like curry and those complex spices, most of that is your olfactory receptor neurons adding to the flavor. So taste and olfaction, mostly we look at the orbitofrontal cortex. This is where the textbook states, and most textbooks state, that taste and smell are first combined. And they're receiving information from the somatosensory cortex. So how does this feel on my tongue? Is it soft? Is it hard? Is it crunchy? And the inferotemporal cortex, the visual wet pathway. So my sister does that green eggs and ham. I don't know if anybody did this when they were young, but with her 3- and 4-year-olds, every year she does the do you like green eggs and ham? And a lot of kids who like eggs and ham do not like green eggs and ham. That those foods being a different color, part of your brain says, that's just wrong. And I had one student do their project, so I usually have projects in this class. I had one student do their project on how much sound influences us as well. So part of that crunchy might be it crunching in our mouth, but some of it is maybe the sound of the crunch, or something like the sound of popcorn popping can really influence our perception. This putting together the information through bimodal neurons, so neurons that respond to more than one sense. And typically the way these neurons respond is they respond to similar qualities of stimuli, or qualities that tend to occur together in the environment, which might say why sometimes things that don't look right or don't feel right, we feel like there's something wrong with the perception of our flavor and our experience is not the same, because these bimodal neurons aren't firing in the same way. So one example is a cell that responds to the taste of sweet fruits would also likely respond to the smell of sweet fruits. And the orbitofrontal cortex is said to be the cortical center for detecting flavor and perceptual representation of foods. So really putting all of this information together for the experience of foods. When they had people judge the pleasantness or the taste of wine, and what they did was they said either this is a $10 bottle of wine or this is a $90 bottle of wine, and the people got to taste the wine. It was the same wine in both of those conditions. I want to say there were three kinds of wine, or 3 bottles of wine, and they tried 2 of them twice. One as a $10 bottle, a quote $10 bottle, and another as a quote $90 bottle. And so as they are tasting this wine, we can see that if they were given no price for the wines at all, they'd have the same ratings. But if they were told they were $10 versus $90 a bottle, they're rating the $10 bottle of wine as less pleasant and the $90 bottle of wine as more pleasant. And again, we see this borne out, like I said before, this affective value in the orbitofrontal cortex. We can see that pleasantness, that experience in neural activation in the orbitofrontal cortex. When it's pleasant and it's $90 bottle of wine, that we have lots of activation of the orbitofrontal cortex. If it's not as pleasant, we're told it's a $10 bottle of wine. You can see again, there's almost what looks like about halfway through, it looks like inhibition, where almost it's this, don't like this. Yeah. And again, this is same wine, so you can either tell your friends that their wine costs a lot more than it does, or you can tell yourself it might not matter what they tell me it costs or what I see it costs. Maybe that's influencing my experience as much as the wine itself. Take that label off and don't think about it. The thing I'm going to talk about is the Proust effect. I think they actually have this now in odors and how odors trigger memories, but they used to have it as the very end of talking about flavor. And either way, Marcel Proust wrote a book called Remembrance of Things Past. He is was a very eloquent author. He's a very famous author, and the Proust effect got named after him because of descriptions that he gave of these really olfactory-induced memories. And we can see that they have more emotionality to them. They're not necessarily more accurate, as the emotionality comes from the fact that the amygdala is involved, and it is involved in emotional associative learning, and it synapses with the olfactory nerve, or information coming from the olfactory bulb. So it gets this information into the brain very quickly, and we can think of smells as really triggering these emotions. And it looks like, if we look at our memories, most of our memories throughout our old age, we're going to remember best what happens about the late teenage, early 20s kind of years. They call it the reminiscence bump. But if we ask people to remember something based on a smell, there's a lot more of this bringing back memories before the age of, or really in the first decade of life. So before the age of 10 or around the age of 10. So when I bring up my grandmother's sticky buns, oftentimes in both of my classes. And then my mom made them for a really long time. My grandmother, Kraft, my mom's mom, died in 1983. It's been a really long time since I've seen her. I was 13 years old when she died, but the smell of sticky buns can still just transport me back to her house and to that time and all of that. And so I'm going to read from the Remembrance of Things Past. I usually have my students read some of this in class, but I think it's worth it. Hopefully my dog won't keep making that noise. So, the sight of the little Madeleine had recalled nothing to my mind before I tasted it. As soon as I had recognized the taste of the piece of Madeleine soaked in her decoction of lime blossom, which my aunt used to give me, immediately the old gray house upon the street, where her room was, rose up like a stage set to attach itself to the little pavilion opening onto the garden which had been built out behind it for my parents. And with the house, the square, where I used to be sent before lunch, the streets along which I used to run errands, the country roads we took when it was fine. So all of these memories of those very early times being brought up, not by the sight of the Madeleine, which is a little cookie, and that apparently got put in a decoction of lime blossom, but the taste, which is really tied to the smell, right? Because flavor is very influenced by smell. And it's different smelling something after you've put it into your mouth, and so triggered all these memories. So there's the Proust effect.